Everybody stand, please. We'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll sing God Bless America, and then Barb will give us some words of inspiration. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America. Through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, what we home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Hopefully you'll see some correlation between our speakers' talk today and some of these words of inspiration. Without this playing with fantasy, no creative work has ever yet to come to birth. The debt we owe to the play of imagination is incalculable, to quote from Carl Jung. Another quick one here from Albert Einstein. The gift of fantasy has meant more to me than my talent for absorbing positive knowledge. And one more here from Dr. Seuss. Fantasy is a necessary ingredient in living. It's a way of looking at life through the wrong end of a telescope, and that enables you to laugh at life's realities.
Barb, could you introduce the introducer of our speaker? That's correct.
Today of introducing the introducer. Welcome, Charlie. I'm glad to see you here today. And we welcome as our introducer, Charlie's son, Eric Adams, who also happens to be Bill's and my godson. So a little family thing here about Eric.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and to the folks online. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you today. The topic is going to be classical education. I'm very familiar with the Easton Kiwanis Club, for many years. So I'm sincere when I say that I do admire all the work that you do for our community. It's an honor to be here. So the speaker today is going to be John Heitzenrater, and I want to introduce him as the headmaster of a brand new school in the Lehigh Valley. So the school is called Chrysostom Academy. We're located right across the street from the Walters house. Sort of. It's right off of Route 512 on 22, just south of there. So we're in our second year of school. We're serving students from the greater Lehigh Valley area in grades K through 12. Okay. So we have a little bumper sticker here, and we wanted to put. You can only really fit 2 words on the bumper sticker to describe the school, right? So we picked classical and orthodox, right? So classical refers to the classical curriculum that the school is based on. Classical curriculum refers to the ideas, it refers to the greatest ideas and the greatest thinkers of the past. But the ideas that have held up over time and have remained relevant over that period of time. John's going to elaborate on this. And then Orthodox refers to the Christian Orthodox Church, commonly known as the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's interesting, there's only about 500,000 Orthodox Christians in the United States. But it's interesting that there's over a dozen Orthodox parishes in the Lehigh Valley area. So you may have heard of the Greek Orthodox, Syrian, Russian, Ukrainian, Antiochian. Did I leave anyone out? Yep. Okay. So we have lots of different ethnic groups. The important point is, though, they may speak different languages or have different foods at their festivals, but they all practice the same theology, and they're all in communion with the Eastern Orthodox Church. So as you might expect, most but not all of our students are Orthodox, but of course we welcome students of all faiths. And we've noticed it's really the classical curriculum that has universal appeal to everyone. So that's what draws people from different places. All right, with that, I'd like to formally introduce our speaker, John. John Heitzenrater has 20 years of experience in classical education. He started his career teaching history and the humanities at a classical school in Fort Worth, Texas. Prior to coming to the Lehigh Valley, he has been a founding headmaster of another school, a director of K-12 history, a regional director under the superintendent, and the headmaster of the second largest responsive ed school with an enrollment of 950 students. Okay? John received his Bachelor of Arts magna cum laude from the College of St. Thomas More, where he studied literature, philosophy, theology, classical languages, and history. In graduate school, he attended the University of Dallas, where he received his Master's of Humanities with a concentration in history. I can speak for our board and say that we're very happy to have John here in the Lehigh Valley at our school. It's an honor for us to. John's presentation, I think, is about 20 minutes long, so that should leave time for questions at the end. And should we interrupt if we have questions during the presentation?
Sure.
Yeah, so it's a pretty small group here. Please feel free to just interject and make it a fun discussion. All right, John?
Thank you. All right. It's an honor to be standing here with you all today and to be talking about something that's very, very important to me, which is the education of children. So I've titled this Slaying Dragons, Why Fantasy is Fantastic and Necessary in Education. We live in a world of extremes, one which pulls us in multiple ways, vying for our attention with promises of wealth, power, fame, and recognition. Our children are, unfortunately, pawns in this environment. The complications of modernity are seen as its greatest progress, as we rely more and more on technology to mold and form the minds, hearts, and wills of our children. A quick glance at a family dinner will show just how far we've come. We, all of us, don't or can't go anywhere without our phones. Some of us do everything with it. It wakes us up, reminds us when we have information that needs to be processed, answers all of our questions, talks to us on the freeway, and soothes us to sleep, only to be counting the seconds of time to do the same thing again the following day. Now, it might seem ridiculous for me to be bashing technology as I present this information through the use of technology. The PowerPoint was prepared with technology. It is being relayed through technology. And if it is successful in striking a chord with you, will be shared through technology. Not all technology is bad. In fact, used as a tool, it can be quite important and necessary. No one, including me, wants to go back to covered wagons, skinning animals for clothing and food, or outhouses. Yet, with our continual march towards progress, our ability to dream and imagine becomes less and less possible. Imagination is that innate faculty we have which allows us to dream and to dream big. When we were children, our imagination was guided and formed by wonder, that great movement of spirit which first revealed the light to us, caused us to gasp in joy at the rainbow after the storm, and pushed us to ask what, why, and how. Why is the world the way that it is? Why do I exist? How is this made? Why do we die? What is the meaning of truth? What is beauty? It is wonder and imagination that inspired us to pick up a book. It was wonder and imagination that caused us to play as children. It was wonder and imagination that inspired us to stargaze in our backyard. In short, wonder and imagination are the most fundamental aspects of our existence, and their proper cultivation is so crucial to our becoming fully human that in a world with so many distractions, we must be deliberate in establishing the means for our children to attain them. One way this can be accomplished is through the reading of fantasy. The great English sage, G.K. Chesterton, once said, quote, Children do not read fairy tales to know that dragons exist. Children already know that dragons exist. Children read fairy tales to know that dragons can be killed. Chesterton leaves no room for rebuttal. The existence of dragons is a given that all children understand. It is only us silly, busy adults that don't believe in dragons. But when do we stop believing in dragons? Is it really part of growing up, or is it something that happens when our imagination is replaced with other external distractions? I don't know why this got jumbled up, but I'm just going to ignore the PowerPoint for a second.
It's proving your point about the technology.
Yes, it is. C.S. Lewis, in a letter to his goddaughter, said, "I wrote this story for you." He's referring to the Chronicles of Narnia. "I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales. And by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday, you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from the upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear and too old to understand a word you say, but I should still be your affectionate godfather." Many of us remember playing cops and robbers as children. Many more may remember living an imagined life in a castle and fought with our friends for the coveted Sir Knight or Lady Dame distinction. In most cases, there were dragons to fight, ladies in waiting to rescue, and kingdoms to defend. It was about as fantastical that one could get living in suburbia. But it allowed one to imagine his or her life as something more, something extraordinary. But fantasy is more than just slaying dragons and noble wizards. In these mystical worlds, timeless truths speak to the mind, heart, and will of the child. The best kind, says Chesterton, is that which reminds us that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear. Now, fear is something which can be good for us and can be tied to common sense. For instance, I'm afraid to walk across the street when there's oncoming traffic. Why? Because common sense tells me that cars will run over me if I do not wait for them to stop. Yet fear can also be debilitating. The battles that are waged in our gut are the battles of wills, the fight that goes on inside each and every one of us when duty, honor, and commitment are not virtues which are second nature to us. And this is something which, if not developed early in the child's formation, can lead to consequences not only for human beings, but also more importantly for the community in which that person lives. We need to develop courageous hearts and strong souls in our children. The time spent with children developing their imagination is crucial to their complete development. Thus, by reading about noble quests, dragon slayings, victory in battle, children are given the ideas and images very early, which in turn shape their worldview. Fantasy fulfills another role, which is more ethereal, if you will, and certainly more fundamental to the formation of children, that of telling a story about the human condition. The great author and poet Tolkien said, "Fairy world," this was his term for all of the imagined worlds of Middle-earth, "contains many things besides elves and fays, and besides dwarves, witches, trolls, giants, or dragons. It holds the seas, the sun, the moon, the sky, and the earth, and all things that are in it, tree and bird, water and stone, wine and bread, and ourselves, mortal men, when we are enchanted." I often say that one reads history to know what a people has done, but one reads literature to know what a people loves and feels. Fantasy, however, goes one step further. I believe that one reads fantasy to know what a people believes. But wait, isn't that what religion is for? Surely. But fantasy has the unbelievable ability to take complex spiritual truths and make them digestible for readers to understand. Fantasy can personify good, evil, death, judgment, heaven, hell, truth, lies, virtue, and vice in a way which is at once good, true, and beautiful, and yet is also applicable to the world around us. And when it involves actions, such as destroying the dragon or rescuing the princess, one is able to read and contemplate the causes and consequences of the actions and the steps which got the character to the point they are in. Child's mind is thus able to go from knowledge of a particular thing and, with proper guidance, journey to understanding something that is universal. Again, Tolkien says, far more often than asking the question, is it true, referring to his stories, they, children, have asked me, was he good? Was he wicked? That is, they were far more concerned to get the right side and the wrong side clear. For that is a question equally important in history and in my fairy world. Furthermore, fantasy literature provides a framework through which the ideas of suffering, redemption, and renewal can be displayed masterfully, sometimes in the same character. Frodo Baggins is the main protagonist of The Lord of the Rings, grows and develops over the course of the story. But his particular hobbit weaknesses make us able to share in his journey, even though we are not in the story itself. It is Samwise who is the real hero of the story, the constant reminder to Frodo of what they are fighting for, the Shire, the good folk of Middle-earth, and each other. There are eternal truths there in the persons of Frodo and Samwise, or Lucy and Edmund, or Beowulf and Hrothgar. And it's precisely these eternal truths which make the case for fantasy literature so compelling. Neither one of these characters is perfect. In fact, some of them are deeply flawed. But their flaws make us love them more than if they were perfect, because fantasy literature understands that the human condition is one which is imperfect, but which strives for perfection. In fantasy, the soul's journey is one of constant purgation, which becomes more soul-like through trial and suffering. Just like the character who slays a dragon, but whose legs are shaking with fear, the soul's formation and development often happens with the knowledge that going forward may bring pain, but fleeing in the face of trial is unconscionable. In that moment, before the dragon is killed, the hero learns something about himself or herself, and the monster learns something about itself. The hero, if he is victorious, perseveres until the end, while the monster realizes it will not live to see another day. Courage is eternal, while evil, being a degradation of the good, knows it cannot survive in its flawed state. A flower which is dead no longer radiates its beauty, and evil can only last until it is overcome by the beauty, truth, and goodness of another thing. It is doomed because its goods are not real goods. No other literature, perhaps, is as adept at visualizing these concepts as fantasy. Fantasy literature, then, is as fundamental to the child's development as doing art, nature study, phonics, or math. Children need to learn their own folk tales and understand the myths and stories which made the world what it is. And we need to stop relegating fantasy to the realm of the unreal. When we moderns say unreal, or it is not real, we lose one of the greatest points of fantastical literature. Just because something is not real doesn't mean that it's not true. Truth, despite what the world says, in my opinion, is not subjective. Subjectivity is the realm of opinion, not truth. Truth is objective. Its premises are eternal. When the dragon is slayed, the objective truth revealed is that evil can be overcome. We only need to have the physical, moral, and spiritual fortitude to stand up and fight against it. And that is more real than many of the real things in our own world. Our children need heroes. They need quests to accomplish, and they need fantasy worlds to show them that such things do exist. Furthermore, children should be allowed to dream. We often school children for daydreaming or for being bored. How many of us in the last week have looked at a child and thought to ourselves, he or she needs to do more? As a father with 11 children, if I earned $1 for every time a child came to me to tell me that they were bored on a Saturday afternoon, I would be a millionaire. Children should be taught that boredom is a good thing. Boredom encourages creativity, and creativity encourages greatness. A seed which is planted should be cared for, and it is when we water it and let it grow. But what if we treated seeds the way we treat our children? We believe that having children is the end all, that having children active is the end all be all of existence. But we must ask ourselves, are we keeping them busy for their sakes or for ours? I knew students at my former school who did cross country in the morning, attended classes, played in the band in the afternoon, then went home, scarfed down dinner, only to work on homework until 11 p.m., at which time they went to bed to do it again the next day. Rather than socially adjusted, well-rounded human beings, they were anxious, exhausted, and generally hated life. We expect our children to do more than we did, to have opportunities we didn't have. Yet, if we're really honest, what are we accomplishing by offering them more than we had? How does it benefit children when we inhibit their ability to be children? Using the analogy of the seeds, what if we were to plant a seed and water it one day, then come in, dig it up, and move it to another spot, only to do this every day? Nothing would ever grow, and we would starve. But this is exactly what we do when we don't allow the seeds of wisdom to take root in our children, when we don't allow them to be bored. We move them from one activity to another, thinking that this is good, yet the children are often miserable in this process. Now, certainly, the gifts of children should be cultivated, but I believe that they should be done with reason. We should get out of the mindset that being busy is good. Busy does not necessarily mean productive. In fact, it can mean just the opposite. Less is usually more when done in the right manner and for the right reason. Our children are not robots who should do everything. They are human beings infused with a rational soul who must be loved and nurtured. But Mr. Heitzenrater, should we just let our children sit around and read all day? Won't that make them weird? It might. But again, we're addressing a problem by replacing it with a problem. And this opposite extreme can be just as damaging. We all know the professional student, the one who couldn't think of life outside of school. So they went to college and never left. As a parent of college-age kids, it is inevitable that their minds will change. My goodness, I thought I would go to law school when I was in college. But I decided after happenstance that I liked teaching more. I think that balance is the key, and here again, fantasy literature gives us a hidden truth about this. Both excess and deprivation are evils in fantasy literature. The character who wants more power, or the dragon who wants more treasure and more stuff, is as bad as the character who wants to take things from others and superficially impose their will on the others. Gandalf is great not because he wields his powers over others, but because he knows when it is appropriate to use his powers to help others. Children should be taught that it is good to play an instrument or to play a sport. Certainly doing things outside of our comfort level is character forming. But too much of something is never a good thing. So in encouraging our children to embrace boredom for the sake of sparking their imagination is as good a character builder, I believe, as encouraging them to play the piano or taking up a hobby. But we must be prudent and balanced in all things. Children need to know that it's okay to be leisurely and to think deeply about the world around them. I spent the first part of this presentation disparaging technology. Certainly, I don't hate technology, but I am distrustful of technology and its ability to destroy our wonder and imagination. It is so easy to get information today that it's becoming harder and harder to contemplate the world around us. As a teacher, I now have to contend with AI writing papers for students. Technology has made our lives more efficient, but I would argue more complicated. Technology takes away the struggle so important for our development from our minds and forces us to take an easier path. We can know everything out there, but nothing in here. Our learning then is less experiential and more mechanical. The mysteries which form us and spur us on to learning are all available at our fingertips. Was it really an apple that Eve ate in the garden, or an Apple iPhone that she came across in the garden, replete with download speeds that were out of this world? The result, in my opinion, is sloppy contributions to the world in which we live. It is a world, in my opinion, that is becoming less beautiful, less good, and less true. As a classical educator, balance and leisure are two key principles of formation. The sweet fruits of wonder and imagination are nurtured and allowed to blossom when these two principles form the foundation for learning. If I had to define classical education in one phrase, it would be the leisurely pursuit of wisdom. Now, this seems simple, but within this phrase are a number of other necessary things. Virtue and the pursuit of virtue ensure that a student is formed completely, not only his or her academic success, but also his or her moral, spiritual, and emotional success. And we classical educators get a bad rap because we tend to stress the teacher's importance, what is commonly referred to as knowledge-centered learning versus student-centered learning. I personally hate both of these distinctions. True education is both knowledge-centered and student-centered. There is nothing more important than meeting students where they are and walking together with students on the road to knowledge. Teachers should always be students themselves, understanding that we are all standing on the shoulders of giants, and that we are only wise when we understand that we are never done learning. If these virtues are developed in teachers and students, what a magnificent and beautiful contribution they could make. Teachers must have the humility and love for their students under their charge and for the wisdom that they impart. For in so being formed, they learn that they are the ones to whom the great tradition belongs, which is itself a huge burden. Together, they are able to set their course towards finding their fulfillment, their own aristeia, or ultimate purpose of sorts. Their intestinal fortitude and formation will make them a force to be reckoned with, and the dragons of this world, both the real and the imaginary, will fall at their feet, retreating to that unreal world, not unreal because it's not real, but because it lacks the goodness, truth, and beauty, which makes all things new. Any questions? I'm sorry, I was a little mechanical, but yes.
Since you talk about fantasy and such, my generation, our fantasy was comic books. How do you feel about comic books?
I love comic books. I have some, so now I think that a lot of comic books have been replaced with graphic novels. Anything that gets a child reading, as long as it's not overly violent and overly, sexually gratifying, I think is fine. But I think that comic books, that idea that we can slip away, Tolkien talks about this. He talks about being accused of being an escapist when people tell him you're trying to escape from reality. And he's like, I am. But the reality that I'm escaping to is more real than what is going on around us. And Tolkien had been in World War II. So he had been formed by this, this horrific event, that idea of escaping into these worlds to see what honor, courage, and commitment can do, I think are beautiful things. Sir.
How do you take concepts like what you just described, using fantasy as like your reference, and apply it to teaching the classical information, which kids can sometimes find boring? Like, we as adults know that biology is not boring, it's fascinating. How do you take this idea of fantasy and apply it to teaching complex things like biology or whatever?
I think that getting a child to understand how the world operates, I think is one of the great challenges that we as teachers have. And I actually, as a classical educator, I love being able to find in the various disciplines what is relevant. I think that when you're talking about biology or science in general, utilizing, because we have the ability to do something, does not necessarily mean that we should do it.
Sure.
And you can use literature, you can use fantasy literature to show that when you try to step outside of the bounds of what's natural, all these things can follow from that. So like if you try to manipulate nature and trying to, I think I read something that was horrific, combining a human embryo with that of a pig or something like that. Sure. Just because we can do it doesn't mean that it's not a monstrosity that should be rejected. And there are truths which you can highlight. I made my daughters read Madame Bovary when they turned 16, because I told them this is what happens if you're not diligent in kind of conducting your own moral life. This is what can happen if you lead this type of life. And it was much easier than telling them to be chaste and to wait until they get married, because they enjoyed the book and I didn't have to preach at them. So I think that what fantasy literature can do is it can give us a relationship with nature, that we respect nature. And it can also show us that when we don't respect nature, bad things can happen.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
What age group are you talking about in your thinking here?
So I think that you should start reading fantasy and folklore to children as soon as they can hear. George MacDonald is he wrote the Princess and the Pauper, the Princess and the Goblin, all these different things. You can start introducing children to this. A lot of the the various American folk tales, Paul Bunyan and all those, Johnny Appleseed, those are all things which usually have some type of moral or theme that they're trying to teach a student or a child. So I think that you can start those very early. This year in my 7th and 8th grade literature class, we did Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We did the Death of King Arthur, and we're working through Beowulf right now. Yeah, I think that you can start those conversations with children very, very, very young.
And you're K through 12?
We're officially K through 10 this year. We'll be K through 11 next year.
And K through 12.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did move up here with 11 children and a dog. And my wife, she thought that it was crazy, but it was exciting. So there's always lots of joy in trying new things.
You have all the kids helping you move.
It's good. I've had a good life. It's been very I've been very fortunate in getting able to have conversations about these types of things and being able to to form the minds of our children, because we live in a very difficult world. You only get one shot at it.
Oh, that was a fascinating presentation, and I've got a lot of questions. You covered a lot of ground and touched on a lot of things that were really critical to the upbringing of children, and really the reality of adults also in our culture. And the first thing that was on my mind was, I'm just wondering if we can get a copy of your manuscript, because
Absolutely.
There's so many things that were in there that it's hard to remember them all.
Sure.
There were a couple of high points that I kind of relate to every day in my field of work, and that is it's kind of having to do with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked that you brought that up, because that's kind of living in a fantasy world that's the wrong kind of fantasy, because it makes it difficult to distinguish not only what's real and what's fake or false, but what the underlying principle is of any particular process, philosophy, task, anything like that. So if you're using technology to perform a task, do you know what the principle of that task is? And the use of technology being so prevalent is, I think a lot of people don't know what the principles. They're just using the automation to accomplish an end result without realizing how to get there. So if they don't have that technology, they couldn't do it.
Right.
And that to me is the real value of technology, is understanding the principle, but then not having to manually go through every step to get to the end result, but you still understand those intervening steps that are required, that are being automated for you by the use of technology. And I'll just say one more thing. When you were talking about Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and other writers of fantasy novels, it made me think of the old Westerns, Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey, about how there would be, a good guy who was fighting the bad guys, and there were, the details were different, but the philosophy was there. It was a fight of good versus evil, and overcoming adversity to achieve a positive outcome. And those principles kind of fit into, even though it was a fictional novel, the principles of good and evil, and honor. And I mean, we laughed and used to call it, truth, justice, and the American way, right? Was the cowboy. But yeah, so you touched on some things that really hit some chords with me. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. I remember reading a story about, I think it was Admiral John Poindexter, who was, I believe that it was Poindexter, who was shot down over Vietnam. And when as he's like parachuting down into the jungle, knowing that he is going to be a prisoner of war, he remembered the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius that he had read. And it was Stoic philosophy that helped him survive his captivity, the Hanoi Hilton at the time. And General Robert E. Lee, who, for better or for worse, gets kind of a bad rap today, was approached by a parent. And she said, how do I make my son a great man? And Lee told her, teach him to deny himself and make him read the Iliad, which I thought was interesting, because you really can't get more fantastical than the Iliad.
Right.
So, thank you. Yes, sir.
You bet. Thank you.
I wanted to just say that some of this fantasy works both ways, from the parents to the children, but from the children back to the parents. And I remember so vividly our children reading a lot of these stories and then passing them on to us as the adults to read them also. And the values that come from the good guys and the bad guys and the forces of evil and the forces of good and so forth. You get into a dialogue as a result of that with your kids, and it's a good way to learn. And I also wanted to say, you mentioned the direction of the teaching from the teacher to the children instead of being entirely children oriented or directed. And I just wanted to reinforce that the teacher is really a critical factor, and the modeling that the teacher does and the evidence of concern and compassion and interest that the teachers have in the students goes an awful long way towards the student being able to respond or responding at all to the nature of some of the things that are passed on to them as education. So bravo to all of you who teach. I think it's great. And we all, I'm sure, can remember some teacher in our lives that was really a role model for us.
Well, thanks again, John. That was very inspirational.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Anybody else? Thanks again. It's good to see everybody. Good to see you, Charlie. That we've introduced ourselves to Charlie again. And thanks to Eric and John, our speaker today. It was a great program.
Well, first of all, it was a great meeting. Thank you, Charlie and Eric. It's great to see you guys and to bring John in. It was really fascinating information, and I'm looking forward to getting that manuscript. It's also fantastic to see everybody here today, and I'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.